welcome to the Denver Museum of Nature and Science. I'm Maura O'Neill in the marketing department here, and I'm sitting with Dr. Steve Lee, who is our space content specialist in the Space Odyssey exhibition. So we're here today to talk a little bit about the Mars InSight landing. Okay, so you mentioned, Steve, that there have been 24 successful missions to Mars. When and how will we know whether InSight is successful?
We'll actually know right now. At least it survived the trip to Mars. It survived the landing process. So it's a healthy spacecraft on the surface of Mars. The next big step is it has to take two of the main instruments on the spacecraft and lift them up with a robot arm and put them down on a very level spot on the surface. That'll take the next 2 to 3 months to do that. And then once they're positioned correctly, they'll turn them on, and the plan is they collect data for 2 years. Mm-hmm. And seismic data and the temperature data that these instruments provide, they're the type of thing that the longer you collect data, the more data you put together, the better the signal is. Mm-hmm. And so we'll probably know whether they're working, i.e. detecting what they're supposed to detect, within the next several months. But to get the full story of enough data to really interpret, to answer the big questions, that's going to take 2 years.
And your point about, we know the spacecraft is healthy because it has landed successfully. Can you give us a sense of what that took to get the lander there?
Well, it's really a remarkable process. You think about it. It starts on the Earth. Of course, they have a large rocket 20 stories high that has to go from the surface of the Earth and then throw that spacecraft at Mars. So first it has to get into Earth orbit, and then they have to fire rockets again to escape the Earth and put it on a path to Mars. That path is about 300 million miles. It takes 7 months to go from Earth to Mars. And then the exciting part happens right at the end. It's called the 7 minutes of terror. Mm-hmm. So the spacecraft goes from 13,000 miles an hour. It hits the top of the Martian atmosphere. It's got a heat shield that protects it from the entry into the atmosphere. It gets 3,000 degrees Fahrenheit on the outside of this heat shield. That slows it down to about 1,000 miles an hour.
Wow.
And then they pop a supersonic parachute, and that slows it down to 100, 150 miles an hour. And then they drop the lander out of the bottom of this shell that the parachute's attached to. It fires up 12 rocket engines. It slows itself down, and when it finally touches down, it's going about 5 miles an hour. It's similar to standing on your kitchen table and jumping to the floor. So final 7 minutes, 13,000 miles an hour to essentially zero on the surface. Mm-hmm. Thousands of pieces of equipment have to work precisely in the right order. They have to be successful, and otherwise the mission would fail. Mm-hmm. And that all worked.
Yeah. And so at the end of 2 years of data collection, how will what InSight is collecting fit into the overall picture of what we know about Mars so far?
Well, as I said, right now we know about the very top layer of Mars, the one that we can see from orbit, the one that we can see sitting on the surface. And what we'll know is Mars from the core of the planet all the way out to space. So we'll have a complete view of that planet, a very good idea of how it formed. Does it have a metal core, same as the Earth does? Is the core liquid or solid? How thick is the mantle, which is sort of the bulk of the planet? And how thick is the crust mm-hmm. of the planet? So the only planet we have a really good idea of the internal structure is the Earth. Mm-hmm. We know quite a bit about the moon, but we will know a whole lot more about Mars than we do the moon at that point. And then what that tells us is not only how Mars formed, but a lot about how the Earth formed, how the other rocky planets, Venus and Mercury, formed. And so that gives us a pretty good idea of what the early solar system was like, what the birth of the planets was like.
Mm-hmm. So Steve, thank you for being here. Can you tell us a little bit about what people who come visit the museum and Space Odyssey can find out?
Well, the museum is a really great place to learn about Mars. We have lots of different pieces of the Space Odyssey exhibit that are devoted to Mars. One of them is behind us right now. This is a system called Science on a Sphere. So we have global maps of Mars. You can get a feel for the entire planet looking at that. We've got some really nice video displays that will show the latest images coming back from InSight, press conferences, things like that. We always cover them. Our volunteers are very knowledgeable about what the latest releases are from a variety of missions. The other really neat thing we have is a diorama that recreates the surface of Mars at a very particular location. It was based on images taken from orbit, and we decided to do sort of a future history of Mars. The idea is this diorama has the first human settlement on the planet. It's the year is 2044, something like that. And several times a day we have astronauts come out and walk in across the diorama. They talk to the audience. The kids in particular can ask questions about what's it like to be on the planet. How do you go to the bathroom in space?
These important questions,
and they get their questions answered. And it's really a very popular piece of the exhibit. So there's lots of different things you can see, lots of different things you can do. And in addition to that, we have exhibits about how stars form and are born and die, things about how telescopes work, looking at infrared light. We have a moon rock, which is exciting. We have some spiders that flew aboard the International Space Station on display. So
covers a lot.
It does.
Yeah. Wonderful. Well, thank you for being here with us to share your expertise. We invite you to come follow your curiosity, find out a lot about space here in Space Odyssey, and to read more about the InSight landing event in Steve's article, please check out coloradograndparent.com.